YouTube, and then I'll, obviously I'll tag you on the link, so you'll have that too. It's funny because we're all prepared for this stuff, but it seems like everybody does it, which is good on their own time. And so, you get like 10 people, and then all of a sudden you see like the YouTube link has like 100 hits. So there we go.
Nice.
And then
so is it
there we go.
So it's, are there folks within the Zoom, or is it primarily just through the Facebook?
So usually I had about 15 people signed up for the Zoom tonight.
Okay.
And yeah. So we'll see if people start to pop in. And then Facebook, what I like about the Facebook Live is it notifies everybody on the page. And there's a way to do this on YouTube Live. I haven't done that. But I need I need an assistant or something, I think, at this point. But no, it's cool.
Yeah.
The first one we did was with Jarrett Lerner, and then next week I'm doing Aaron Steike will be we talk about Mr. Wolf's class. Yeah,
very nice. Yeah,
and then I'll take some time off, and then we'll start lining people up again for January, February, kind of a thing. So yeah, I'm excited. It gives us the ability to kind of, a half hour highlight of my favorite people. So I get to choose who we talk to. And it's not the high pressure of a panel. It's not, you don't have 10 different people all trying to get in their 30 seconds. And this way we can just have a conversation. And like I said, if people pop in, I'll try to look on the Facebook. It's hard to do both.
sure.
But yeah, the intention with the Zoom is, what I like about the Zoom is, people can be on camera and ask us questions. And so we can actually interact with them.
Right.
We really can't do that as much on the Facebook. So let me.
Yeah, I enjoyed your chat with Jarrett. I saw it actually. I was one of those YouTube folks watching it.
Yeah,
so I enjoyed it. So.
Which is great. So I'll go ahead and get started. That way when people come in, but for the Facebook Live and everything, I'll kind of just do my PowerPoint to just kind of talk a little bit about your comics, and then we'll go through the questions. And then if folks pop in live with us, we can answer those questions. And on Facebook Live, I'll go on my phone. You got like multiple screens going. We'll answer those questions too. So let me share my screen. And if you have stuff you want to share too, we should be able to work that out as well. So let me share my screen. All righty. And my wife just says she can see me. She's my backup for Facebook. So there we go.
Nice.
All right. So Lex and Alexis, it's okay if I call you Lex? I just kind of.
Oh yeah, of course.
In my mind, I've always called you Lex. So
yeah.
Alex Fajardo, Eisner Award-winning editor, cartoonist, student of the classics, which I'm a huge Greek and Roman history fan. Lex has created a unique blend of comedy, literature, and high adventure in his graphic novel series, Kid Beowulf. And if you go to his website, just Kid Beowulf, but the part that I love is the teach part of it. So Tracy Edmonds, who's a fantastic resource, I put her website on here as well, tracyedmonds.com. She's an educator that I know very well. And she and others have created Common Core aligned lessons for each of the 4 books. And of course, you can reach out to Lex also on Twitter, which is, I think, where I first got to know you. So I just kind of went through, and I love this on your website, my own kids being huge Rick Wardian fans. And when I saw this, what Rick Wardian did for the Greek gods, Fajardo has done for Beowulf. I mean, that is such a huge compliment.
It's a very nice pull quote. And I've used it as much as I can. So I'm glad that it caught your attention. So
it's like a bumper sticker on your cards, on a t-shirt.
That's right.
I mean, now it's fantastic. In fact, I was talking to Nate Powell even, and I didn't realize he had done one of the Rick Wardian graphic novel adaptations, which Rick Wardian's everywhere. I mean, it's fantastic. Wow. So inspired by the epic poem Beowulf, which my wife teaches in 8th grade language arts, Kid Beowulf is an action adventure, mythological mashup, graphic novel series following the adventures of 12-year-old twin brothers Beowulf and Grendel as they travel across distant lands and meet fellow epic heroes therein. This series is ideal for fans of Bone, Asterix, and Avatar. And also for me personally, because my family, my kids and I, we love the George O'Connor.
It's a terrific series. Love that. Love his work. Yeah.
And sadly, he's I just read his last one that's coming out next year. I read the arc for that one. So the last one, but yeah, fantastic series. And yours falls right in line with all that. And in my own family, in my own classroom, we've used your books, even though technically they're, elementary, maybe lower middle school level books. They're fantastic to use in high school classrooms too. And we'll talk about that.
Oh, that's high praise. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah. Just look at the covers. If kids come into my classroom, and I love when we get to a new unit and I just put graphic novels out in the room. And of course we have the textbook and everything, but these are the books that kids are going to gravitate to. And, you can read this graphic novel. I know it takes, 2 years of blood, sweat, and tears to make, and we can sit and read it in one class session. But what it does for my high school students is, okay, I want to know more. And so that's the beauty of the graphic novels and the comics in the classroom. So book one, origin story, twin brothers, Beowulf and Grendel, separated at birth, reunited by an extraordinary family, to say the least. Book two, King Charlemagne. Charles the Great. I teach this in my classroom, and my kids are like, you can make a comic of it. Yeah, like the imagination.
Oh yeah. I was just going to say what I love about Charlemagne and those stories is that it's an analog to King Arthur, but for France,
Yeah. And when, we were just showing, in fact, I brought it up. I had shown the famous painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps, and he's got his name inscribed in the rocks and Charlemagne's name inscribed in the rocks. And this idea that, not to all of a sudden go into Adolf Hitler, but, Adolf Hitler looked up to him, and all these historical connections that we can start to get. Fantastic. Book three, and this one I was kind of surprised with El Cid. I thought that was a cool kind of left turn, kind of getting into different types of history. I thought that was really cool. And then of course book four, which just came out not too long ago, right? Just a couple months now.
Yeah, it was August,
yeah. Which I love. And so one of my favorite all-time time periods is Rome. It is the Roman Empire. It's one of the reasons why I became a history teacher. And I always read Gibbon's History of Rome, the tome, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And we make a lot of connections to what's going on in world events today and the American Empire and things like that. And if you start with that, that's really intimidating. If you start with, Kid Beowulf, and all of a sudden now, certainly kids on an elementary school level, 3rd, 5th grade, I would even say 6th, 7th grade, would be more appropriate for like a class set of these books, in my opinion. But to have them out in a high school classroom. So this can help with students who are struggling with reading to begin with, where students who are afraid, for good reason, who are struggling with reading of the giant textbook, that fears. English language students, I've taught through the US State Department with comics with countries all around the world. And you don't have to know the language, you kind of take a look at the images. So we'll talk about all those things in the conversation tonight. But I couldn't help, this is what blew me away with the Tarpeian Rock, is I've always, this statue of, Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, and this statue, and the way you were able to make her come to life, the wolf, the mom, come to life, honestly, just blew me away. It just stunned me, knowing the history, loving the history of Rome. And what that does for me, and I think for a lot of our students, is it takes away the capital H history, and it makes it, lowercase history. It makes it more approachable. That, yeah, these are actually people, mythologized at this point, but actually people. And what do these mythologies mean to us, whether it's Zeus or whatever it might be. And I think that's a really powerful type of a thing. And so you've got this great storyline. And so what's great about this in the classroom is this is now the 4th book. So students know the characters and they feel comfortable. And so as they go through different historical eras, they feel comfortable going with their friends, if you will. And I asked for this one on page 90 because there's just so much going on in these books. And I feel, and I'll ask you to kind of talk about this later, is the comic format. So too many times publishers put together these graphic novels because they're trying to catch in on the craze, right? So these textbook companies, and it's a lot of prose, it's a lot of information, and the images really add nothing to the story. But with this visual literacy, the reason why I wanted this page 90 in here, when Hama the pig, is it Hama? Is that,
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
If you look at just what's going on in the background, it's hysterical. And he kind of just gets out and he walks away. And, I have to teach my high school students how to read a comic because a lot of them haven't before, and they'll miss this part of the story. And so we can go back and yes, we can read it quickly, like I said, in a class period, but my son will read the same book, 10, 15 times, and we get more and more out of it each and every time. And then the visuals in terms of the gladiators and things like this. And so I have my own students create comic books and make them tell or have them tell their own stories, make them part of the history. And so again, these images in an exciting, approachable, historical way, encourage them to do so. And then to my heart, great as a history teacher, the annotations, the notes that are in there, the pictures that are in there, the glossaries. For me, I'm the kind of person who, when there's multiple characters, I get lost, and I usually do a character sketch on my own. But you have this helps me as a reader to remember. But then you get into the other pop culture, you get into the literature that you've read, the key terms, just fantastic. And then your newest one, Hama the Pig's Adventure. Now we're getting into Vikings and just, I mean, the panoramic views that I haven't seen in the other books. So now you're kind of stretching it, no pun intended, in these bigger images and things. And again, just looking at these images and what's going on and what do we see is just so fantastic. And so this is, earlier elementary school. And I'm excited for this because I think that's then going to hook the kids even earlier. And then they're going to want to read, books 1, 2, 3, and 4 and so forth. So let me stop my sharing here.
That was great, Tim. Thank you for that walkthrough. That's great. You can keep on talking too. I'm just going to sit and bask in the praise. But I really appreciate your perspective as a teacher and how you use the books in the classroom and what elements of the books work for you specifically as an educator. That's nice to see.
Yeah, and like I said, I think too many times because what the fight is. Comic books are for kids. And I'm a reading specialist, and I'm a high school social studies teacher, and I'm also a reading specialist. And when I went through my master's program, I was the only non-elementary school teacher that was going for my reading specialist degree. And it's kind of this idea that, we only teach reading in elementary school, and that's a falsehood. We need to teach it in college too. And the same thing with comics. It's never a replacement, but man, is it a powerful tool for 21st century reading and all the things that we're doing. And we can't overestimate fun, right? The engagement factor of all this and the visual literacy that our kids are literally bombarded with every single day. And so if my kids notice Hama the Pig in the background, that's going to make them much better political cartoon analysts, right? Like all those skills, they really okay, we're going to take apart a Dr. Seuss book, or we're going to take apart a Disney cartoon that they created for propaganda in World War II. And that's all real history, and that's all real whatever. It's literally the same skills, whether we're looking at a hip hop song we're annotating, looking at a letter from George Washington, or we're reading comics and graphic novels. And it really is all the same skills. So I really love the fact that Tracy and you and the others put together these teacher guides, like we said, are on your website. Ready to go. I mean, in this time of craziness, it's such a wonderful free resource for teachers. I really can't recommend them enough.
Yeah, no, and it's always great to work with. I think for book 4 through Tracy, we did it through in association with Reading with Pictures, which is a great organization, and Jana Tropper helped me develop the reading guide. Oh yeah, there you go. Got that one too.
Love them. Yeah. They're actually the first people I got in touch with that I was like, oh, wow, there's other people who do this. Like I thought it was kind of all on my own. And yeah, there's lots of great teachers out there now. Reading with Pictures is a fantastic organization that does a lot of work. So I don't know. A lot of times with creators, I kind of know their background story a little bit, but what's your comics background? Like, how did you get into this? Why did you get into this? Why are you telling these stories through comics?
Well, in your intro, I was really struck by the fact that you mentioned that you have students who have never read comics. And that's shocking to me because there's never a time in my life where there weren't comics. I've always been drawn to the art form. When I was a kid, I would read the newspaper comic strips while I was eating my Cheerios. And that was my first foray into it, like reading Peanuts and Snoopy and loving those characters and immediately being drawn to the text and the pictures and wanting to learn how that was done. Watching Looney Tunes with my dad growing up, like it was just sort of the part of the air that I breathed. So it was never something that I needed to discover. It was just sort of there. And of course, along the way, you gravitate to those different authors and illustrators and characters that you're sort of inspired by. So yeah, I've always just wanted to be a cartoonist. And specifically, I remember visiting a family friend. I think I must have been like 8 or 9, and they had introduced me to this book of theirs on their shelf. And you know how you have those memories that are like crystalline in your head. And I remember him pulling this hardcover back book off of his shelf, like the light caught it just so, and he handed it to me, and it was this book called Asterix the Legionary. And Asterix is a French comic, which is wildly popular in Europe. They sell like 30 million copies of each new album that come out, and it's been, they think they started in the 60s. And it's about this little Gaul and his best friend, who's sort of this rotund guy. It's comical. It takes place during the Roman era that you're so familiar with. So Julius Caesar is a character. And they kind of romp around Europe, Asterix and his friend Obelix, beating up the Romans and getting out into all these adventures. And it's beautifully drawn. And I remember when I was a kid, I saw that. It's like, I said, I need to learn how to do this someday. So that was definitely one of the firebrands for me. And so it's, yeah, in terms of my own personal arc as a creator, like all kids, I just drew comics and we created stories, because that was just sort of what I was encouraged to do by lots of great teachers, and I just so enjoyed creating them and sharing them with my fellow students in 6th grade and 7th grade, and just kept going at it. And eventually saw that things like developed a comic strip, and I got that into the school papers, and that sort of, to get that sort of notice or feedback, that instant kind of feedback, was really gratifying. And so it was a very gradual growth. I really wanted to at first become a comic strip syndicated cartoonist, and sadly there were no more newspapers when I got to the point where maybe that could become a viable career path. And actually the strip that I did in college that I tried to get syndicated was called Plato's Republic. So there's always sort of been this, for me, a combination of the very classical stuff that I've always loved and been inspired by, but then also this very new kind of idiom of comics to kind of share it. And so in terms of Beowulf, that you said your wife teaches it in 8th grade?
8th grade language arts, yeah.
Okay. That's really interesting, because I first came across it, I think, in AP English in 12th grade. And then we read the Burton Raffel translation. And up to that point, I read all kinds of Greek mythology, Roman mythology, the Norse myths, a big library full of all those great books, similar to what George has been doing with Olympians, but, different era. But I'd never read epic poetry. And so I read novelizations or different sort of approaches to them. So when we first read Beowulf in AP English, I think I was the only person who actually liked it. And something about the language of the poetry was just so tangible, and it sort of lit a fire in my mind. I could see the whale road and the serpents in the water and Beowulf fighting Grendel and all these amazing evocative images. So it always sort of stuck with me as a story that I really liked. And in college, I studied the classics, primarily Greek and Roman studies. So delving into Homer and all those things. But when I got to the point where I wanted to tackle my own comics, I came back to Beowulf because there's something very straightforward about the story. It's a very, you can break it down to a 3-act structure. Beowulf fighting the different monsters, Grendel, the sea hag, and the dragon. To a certain degree, at this point, most people have heard of Beowulf too. There's that old great Woody Allen joke that never take a class where they make you read Beowulf. So, and I thought I could use it primarily as a gag, because when I read the text, he is a big, huge, hulking warrior, sort of like Athena, full sprung from the head of Zeus. Um, and when I was rereading it for fun, it just sort of struck me like, well, what have he been like as a kid? And so that funny little weird notion just sort of to snowball this idea of kind of inverting the epic poem, and instead of Beowulf the Viking and Grendel the monster as combatants, turning them into twin brothers, because you had the element of the mother, and so that sort of started to think of, in terms of like, well, who's Beowulf's mother? He's sort of an orphan in the book. So there's sort of like these openings in the epic poem where you could sort of make this connective tissue. And so I just ran with it. And that first book, it was, as you say, is very much the origin story. It explains how and why they're all related, but it's really just the groundwork for taking Beowulf and Grendel across Europe and Asia, where I can have them interact with all these other stories that I love, and in a way, hopefully, inspire kids and other readers who'd never heard of these characters, folks like Roland or El Cid or Gilgamesh or Odysseus, and give them an opportunity to meet them through sort of my iterations, and hopefully inspire them to go back and read those originals. That's kind of the whole conceit.
Yeah, and I think you're missing a really important part of what you do is, when we talk about Shakespeare, even, the idea that these stories are timeless and they can be reinvented and they can be put in alternate realities, and that's what your work, that's what Kid Beowulf allows to have happen. Is, okay, you just blew my mind, like you just reimagined this whole thing, and now for students they're like, well, I can do that too, and that is such a powerful thing when we teach these kids books and history. And I do the same thing when we teach social studies. Yeah, okay, there's some things that we know, but a lot of history even is kind of made up, and we're kind of going with our best guess here at this point. And that opens, again, that changes that capital H history and makes it the lowercase h, and makes it more accessible for everybody. So that's fantastic. And when you were talking, you made me think of my love for Canterbury Tales, or Chaucer, and same thing in my English class. Like, really nobody else liked it. I was like hysterical laughing, and I love the book. I stole the book. I still have it at home. I loved it so much as a kid. I still have the paperback. Nice. I probably shouldn't say that, but no, that's fantastic. And I think we forget sometimes as teachers and creators that what that does is it opens up that door for the reader. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And ultimately, like I said, it's a lot about pointing them back to the originals. So in each of the books that I do, I try to present, and what I call the prologues, just kind of a retelling of the original Beowulf tale or the Song of Roland or El Cid, because I feel like you at least need that foundation. And it's there if the kids want to read it. They don't necessarily have to. It's sort of my attempt at trying to mimic epic poetry. So there's some good rhymes and there's some clunky ones here and there, take your pick, but it's also done in a more illustrative style to sort of evoke that kind of grandeur. So I always tell my colorists, kind of make this look like a Ridley Scott movie. That's kind of what I'm going for. So for me as a creator, it's really important to sort of, and I try to do this with the back matter too, to show not so much the, that I'm crowing about the research, but how important that is, like that element of veracity and verisimilitude and all those things that you want to, when you're a creator, you pour through all the different translations, you read all the different texts, and then when you're ready to write and create, you throw it all out and hope it all gets mixed in your head, and that some of that gets translated to page in a fun, accessible way.
Yeah, it's. I should have my document camera set up, but one of the pages I had marked, what you're talking about in the prologue, it's such a different tone, in terms of, this is more like, okay, this is the high school version of, okay, and this is like, it's really cool how you do that. But again, even if you don't read the words, right, you get the idea through the illustrations, and I think that's the power of it. That it's great that you didn't shy away from that, in terms of before jumping into your iteration of it. I think that's fantastic.
I will say the prologues are probably the hardest part, because I do need to, A, I'm drawing in a different style, and B, I then have to sort of condense, in the case of an epic poem, like a, 3,000 line epic poem down to like 10 pages or whatever the source material is. So I always try and take as much care as I can with those, but it's definitely the most taxing part. And you know how hard it is just to make a comic to begin with. So it's when they work, I'm happy with them, and I'm happy that they're in the book, because I think they serve a function that like I said, probably the 10-year-old is going to skip over the prologue and get right to the good stuff. I get
Right.
that, but it's there if they want to return, you know.
Yeah. Although I think, honestly, I think they're gonna, after reading it, I think they're probably a lot more likely to go back to the beginning, actually, with that understanding of that. I mean, I remember my daughter read Sense and Sensibility, a manga version, when she was second grade, maybe. And she got a lot of it. And the idea was, well, now I want to go back and I want to read the real book when I get older. And that's kind of what you're doing here is, you know, you're introducing this in a non-threatening, a very engaging way, to then go back and act like you're putting the candy with, you know, you're making this realistically, educationally so much fun while the learning is going on, and it kind of makes it sneaky, which is what you want in the classroom, right? Awesome. So I guess, I mean, we're kind of already talking about that, but always a big question that I want to ask people with these teaching with comics interviews is, you know, I know you've had some really cool classroom visits, and I know that you like to do that, which is always fantastic. So kind of just, you know, briefly kind of describe what you see as, you know, the value of comics in education. And, you know, if you have a favorite tidbit from experiences that you've had with students or teachers, just what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I certainly miss in the last year and a half is miss the opportunity of just going to a school physically and sharing my work with students. It's interesting to because, you know, usually how I frame my talks are generally under the assumption that they've never heard of Beowulf, they never heard of Roland, El Cid, what have you. But they have heard of Spider-Man, and they know who Batman is, and they know who Captain America is. So I usually sort of start with the very broad framework of like, well, those guys are sort of our mythology of the current day. You know, these are these heroes that they have these morals and ethics that we look up to, that we can read about in the text. And I sort of use that as a thread to get back to these older stories. And it's not necessarily a one-for-one, you know, like in the superheroics, but they certainly are, I think, part of the same tapestry, you know. And so it's fun to share just that kind of thread, because kids are certainly familiar with Spider-Man and all these great heroes. I mean, I grew up reading that mythology, which then sort of turned me on to another mythology. So in that respect, there's a great accessibility for comics in the classroom. But I think you know, on the very kind of base side. But you know, the other thing is there's just so much you can do with comics, and the storytelling can just go in so many different ways, and the genres that you can touch on. I think it's just a terrific resource. And so I just, you know, I love to share my love of the comics and how I use them in my own work, how I'm inspired by them, and more often than not, when I go to these school visits, you know, it used to be, actually, I should say this, 10 years ago, maybe more than 10 years ago, I would go to schools and I would ask the kids, you know, have you ever read Bone before? Maybe one or two hands would go up. And this was when, you know, it was the black and white Bone. And so I, you know, they were very familiar with Garfield, but things like Bone they'd never heard of. Raina certainly wasn't, you know, on the scene. And in the time, you know, in the 10, 11 years that I've been doing this, those hands just start to raise more and more. So, you know, kids love these stories. They certainly are gonzo for anything by Raina Telgemeier, Kazu, Jeff Smith. And I mean, a lot of that is a testament to folks like you and the librarians who know just how great comics are as a reading tool. So to see that transition over the last 10 years has been remarkable, and it's really exciting because, you know, the moment you walk in and you say, oh, you have a cartoonist is coming, they're already fired up. They want to know everything you're going to share with them, and then some.
Yeah, I did my daughter's school brought me in for what do you call it, like career day, and she let everybody know that the comic book teacher guy was coming in, and like the kids were freaking out, and like they all signed up for it, and they just wanted to hear about. And I don't even, at the time, I wasn't even making comics or anything. I just was sharing about, working with creators, and I mean, they were amazed. And yeah, I just wanted to, Jeff Smith's, I don't know if you've read Tiki, but it's just speaking about bone and everything, but it's about human I don't know, what would you call it, ancestry. It's a beautifully written book, but it's called is it Tiki? Tuki, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I just read it a couple weeks ago, and it just blew my mind. But yeah, when I put bone out in my classroom, like the first day of school, kids come in and they scan through my room and they see bone, like these surly, like 16, 17-year-old teenagers, and suddenly they're like, oh my God, like you have bone.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jeff Smith for me has been one of those hallmarks of somebody to storytelling to try and aspire to, artistry to try and emulate. Him and folks like Stan Sakai. I have Tuki too. I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet. I'm really looking forward to diving into it. And just to nerd out a little bit about him as a cartoonist. You held it up. It's landscape, which is fascinating to me because so much of all of his comics up to that point have been portrait. So for somebody like him to sort of shift to an entirely different, mode of storytelling really speaks to just how good he is. That he can go from one way to another and make it look as effortless.
Well, like I said, I think you kind of did the same thing when you switched to the new book. You're kind of doing more landscape with the Vikings and all that kind of stuff. Like I said, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So like kind of, it's always a tough question, but like, and I know because you kind of just got done 2 books, but what's kind of on the horizon? I was kind of reading through on your website, and one of your questions you said you're asked is, will this be made into a comic or a cartoon? I'm like, wow, that would be fantastic to see Kid Beowulf like on Saturday mornings. How awesome that would be. But kind of what's coming up next with you?
Well, I would certainly love that animated story too down the road. For me, right now I'm working on a short story that kind of takes place between books 3 and 4. For those who've read my series, I always like to leave some gaps in between the moments of the book, sort of like, how in Star Wars there was that gap between the episodes, and that's sometimes where the story even breathes a little bit more, or you could take these sidetracks. And so, these books that I do are like about 200 pages or so. And by the time I'm done with them, oftentimes there are these characters who I have to say goodbye to because, we're sort of done with this adventure and we're moving on with Beowulf and Grendel. But I really like these characters, and all these other stories sort of populate about what could be going on in these sidetracks. So in any event, I have several short stories that I've done over the years. I'm working on one right now, and those are going to be collected into a book that'll probably be out next summer. It's sort of the Songs and Sagas collection. So for the Uber fan, it has these other short stories that build out the Kid Beowulf universe. And while I work on that, I'm thinking about book 5, which will be the next place that Beowulf and Gretel go, which will be Greece, and there'll be Beowulf will meet Odysseus, who is a very different sort of person than he is, and so I'm looking forward to diving into the Odyssey and the Iliad thereafter. And I've been looking forward to those books for years because that was the stuff I studied in college. So, I'm just sort of at the very beginning where sort of taking in all different kinds of ideas and research and reading all the translations and just sort of nerding out about the material. And then eventually I'll start to script that. There's no, I have almost too many projects I am doing. So the problem is the time to get to everything, because it's sort of outside of for my colorist, it's kind of a one-man shop on this end. So these things take time, but I really love the craft of it, of from the tedium of ruling out what some might think tedium of ruling out a penciled page. You know, there's something really nice about that, all the way to the final of you know, putting in that text in the word balloons. I love every aspect of making comics, and so yeah, whatever project I'm working on next, I sort of like throw myself into it as much as I can.
That's like the Odyssey, and that's fantastic. My wife, you know, she's taught the epic sagas, and we teach them as well in the high school level. So I love that you know, kids could be reading these books and they come to us at the high school level and they've already got that background knowledge now, and they're like, oh yeah, that's fantastic. And it just, as a teacher, so thankful for making that just so accessible for our
Well, you
kids.
know, if I'll be even, I mean, I love that you're bringing them to the classroom and engaging with the students. For me, as somebody who's a lifelong fan of this genre of mythology and history and all that stuff, I sort of view each book as like a conversation with the text of like that source material, and so, you know, that's sort of why I call it a mythological mashup, because, you know, Beowulf clearly wasn't alive during the time of the Odyssey, and you know, he wasn't around during the Roman Empire. And so, you know, I try and let folks know that this, you know, these are loving mashups of all these different genres, and the idea is for me to just sort of look at it in that big tapestry of almost like the Joseph Campbell, you know, world myth, and how even though Beowulf wasn't around with Odysseus, well, there are elements of Beowulf and elements of the Odyssey that do actually cross over, and I'm even looking forward to going into those further places into you know, Mesopotamia with Gilgamesh, and into South American stories, and just to sort of see how all this material connects, and how one inspires the other. And so, yeah, I love that you share it with your students. And for me, as a nerd student myself, I just love to dig into it too. So it's cool.
That's cool, because I didn't even think of that. You're doing the heroic journey. Talk about the crossover with language arts and social studies, and it really is. I didn't even think of that. All right, yeah. I mean, that with all those books and all the different time periods, but you're still kind of showing cross culturally. I mean, we just did a unit in my classroom where we looked at fairy tales from around the world throughout history, and we kind of took a look at what are some commonalities and what do we want our kids to know around the world and all that kind of stuff. So the same idea. That's fantastic.
Yeah, the hero's journey. You know, I just absolutely love Heroes with a Thousand Faces and what Joseph Campbell was talking about, and so that's sort of definitely the point of view that I'm approaching. And you know, the superstructure of the Kid Beowulf story is, like, you may have noticed it when you read book 4, sort of this shift between Beowulf and Grendel, in the sense that Grendel's monster side, the more that he gets into these ancient places where monsters once resided, he's sort of battling with his own inner demons. And so, you know, the conflict that is in the original Beowulf, the confrontation between Beowulf and Grendel, I always sort of allude to that in my stories. And that's sort of what the brothers on their vast journey across Europe and Asia and elsewhere are contending with. It's sort of that embrace your destiny, fight against it, that whole kind of thing. So, so yeah, each new book is another chapter in their evolving storyline as growing up as brothers who are fated to fight each other, so to speak.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. When I sent out a tweet about this earlier, I just the words just comics, history, literacy. I mean, that's, if I had to summarize your work here, I mean, that's what I want as a teacher. It's fantastically engaging. And I really do appreciate that. So
I'm going to use that. That's another great book quote I'm going to use, Tim. So,
hey, please do. So I'm gonna flip back up before we end here. See if I can do this right. I'm gonna flip back up your contact information and et cetera, so folks can do that. So let me share my screen here, and we'll go back to the beginning. There we go. So if you go to there you go. So, oh no, where'd it go? I had it. Let me try one more time. We'll just leave it right here. So Lex Fajardo, who we've been speaking with. So we've got his Kid Beowulf works. We're up to book 4 now, Tarpeian Rock. We were just talking about ancient Roman history. And so his website, kidbeowulf.com, if you go to the teach part of it, there are Common Core for free to download lessons that I've looked through that are fantastic to use in your classroom. You can reach him on social media at Lex Fajardo Art. And so we are looking at, again, I'll just kind of, just so we get an idea here of the artwork, the titles, the history, the engagement. And again, we tend to take a look at these as maybe around 4th, 5th, 6th grade level books, but I've used them in my high school classroom, both as introductory materials, but also just the idea of engagement where students see these and they see the wonderful research that goes into these, and it inspires them to then learn more and read more. And then Lex also has Ham of the Pig's Big Adventure, which is slightly different. It's on an earlier level, and we see more beautiful landscape type artwork. So let me stop sharing here. So any closing words, Lex? Again, I just really want to say thank you. I appreciate everything that you do. And I'm looking forward to getting more of this out to educators.
No, this has been terrific, Tim. I really appreciate the time to talk shop, and thank you for being such an advocate for my work and so many other cartoonists out there who are, you know, just thrilled that work like ours is embraced by the educator community. It makes it that much more worthwhile. So thank you.
And it's getting easier and easier as the years go on. I think more and more people are getting on board, so it's fantastic. So it was great speaking with you, Lex. I will, there you go. So I'll stop recording and I will put this up, like I said, on